The retiring Chief of Defence of the Armed Forces has come under fire for saying a laddish culture is encouraged in the army.
Yes, General Sir Nick Carter made the comments when he faced questions from MPs over the treatment of women, with many former servicewomen criticising him for encouraging toxic behaviour. Let's have a look. Well, is a laddish culture necessary in the armed forces in order to be able to defeat the enemy? Joining us now to discuss this, former Royal Navy officer Chris Parry and ex-SAS soldier Rusty Firmin. Rusty Firmin, is it something to be encouraged? Oh, hello, Rusty, can you hear? Or have we... Well, unfortunately, we seem to have a technical problem with getting through to Rusty. We will fix that and come back to you. OK, so let's start then. Chris Parry, very good morning to you. A laddish culture is criticised for encouraging toxic behaviour. But what General Sir Nick Carter seems to be saying is you sort of have to be made of different stuff in order to be able to do the tough stuff in the armed forces.
No, of course you don't. We draw our people from society just like any other. We train them, we get them used to combat and all the things that they're required to do. And I'm afraid this sort of exceptionalism is always used as an excuse for treating people badly, especially women and those sort of people who are not considered part of the in-group. It's totally unacceptable in modern armed forces that we talk like this. General Nick Carter was talking about the Army. I think if you applied that to the Navy and the Air Force, including the Royal Marines in the Navy, that sort of talk would be totally alien. And I've seen over my career this laddish culture lead to, I'm afraid, the breakdown in lives, alcoholism, and all sorts of other things. You don't have to be a lad to be in combat. You have to be a professional, decent human being.
One of the arguments they make, Chris, and I'm sure Rusty will be able to make this when we get him back, is that there's a sense of camaraderie and team bonding that has to happen if you're going to be on the front line, if you're going to be in the trenches and if you're going to be fighting side by side next to one of your fellow soldiers. And actually that is the sort of thing that is firmed up through this culture of going out together, of drinking together, of believing in each other, come what may. And that's a fundamental part of being on the front line.
No, it isn't. It's called leadership, and if your leaders are doing their job properly, you shouldn't need alcohol. You shouldn't need these sort of things. We work hard, we play hard, but it shouldn't be at other people's expense. And this is the issue. It's not just other people's expense in relation to the general public. It's in relation to the sort of people who aren't considered to be part of the in-group within a certain area. I've worked with the Army on many occasions. And where we've seen a problem, particularly in the training establishment, is where this laddish culture, I'm afraid, rolls over people. And people aren't considered as individuals. They're considered as commodities that are to be used for armed force interventions and things like that. This is the 21st century. This is not anything to do with something that's happened in the past. And we wouldn't tolerate laddish behaviour on the streets of our cities. We shouldn't really tolerate it amongst people who, let's face it, are representing their country at international level, just like sportsmen or any other.
It's very different, though. But it's very different, isn't it? Sort of, you're not on the street, are you, walking down the street when you're in Afghanistan or you're in the front line and you're fighting an enemy in Iraq or wherever we have had some conflict going on more recently. The comparison between sort of behaviour on the street and treating people that you're walking past and actually the behaviour on a battlefield has to be considered to be different.
No, it isn't. The sort of people that are going to misbehave in public are the sort of people who are going to misbehave on the battlefield. And we've seen examples of all sorts of outrageous behaviour recently, the deployment to Kenya, for example, and other things in the front line. We've got to expect more from our people. And I'm afraid to say, in my experience, the good citizens are the good soldiers, sailors and airmen. And we've got to inculcate in our people that when we are fighting and acting amongst people, and that's what was happening in Afghanistan and Iraq and many of the operations in which I've been involved, you actually have to have a standard of behaviour, a culture and a system of conduct that actually allows you to represent your country at international level.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that. Rusty Firmin, huge apologies for the technical error, which meant that we couldn't speak to you at the beginning of that debate. But now you have the floor, so to speak. You think that the comments by General Sir Nick Carter are absolutely right. There's nothing toxic about that culture at all.
Unfortunately, when the technical problem was on, I could see Nick Carter, but I couldn't actually hear anything he was saying because of the technical problems. But I did see him appear on the screen, but didn't hear a word he was saying.
OK, so we were talking to Chris Parry alongside you, but the comments by General Sir Nick Carter are that part of the reason we encourage a laddish culture is ultimately our soldiers have to go close and personal with the enemy. But that has been described as toxic by critics, saying that that isn't an appropriate culture amongst our armed forces. What do you think? Well,
you know, toxic is one word, isn't it? But actually, I agree with General Sir Nick Carter. Of course I do. You know, you've got to have been there and done it, not sit in a chair and pretend that you know what's going on. You need to have the culture they've got. It's not broken, so don't fix it. It's been there forever. And the way I see it is, who is it that's trying to lay down these, put this woke agenda?
Still struggling, sadly, clearly, with Rusty's connection down there. Let's just come back to Chris very briefly, if you can. You heard, Chris, we got a little glimpse of what Rusty had to say, and that very much he said, look, it's not broke. Why are we trying to fix it?
It is broken. If you look at the culture within, particularly the army at the moment, there are huge numbers of conduct and cultural issues that need to be resolved. Right from the start, we have to accept that we have a responsibility, as I said, to represent our country. We cannot continue the way it is at the moment. I see too many examples of bullying, harassment, and also misogynistic behaviour. It's not really a great atmosphere right now for people with any sort of difference to exist. And until that culture is sorted out, we cannot be full professionals acting on the international stage or indeed being responsible to Parliament or to the public.
OK. Chris, thank you very much for joining us. Chris Parry there. Sadly, we couldn't keep the link up to Rusty.
I don't know why that... I mean, that's just a technical glitch, isn't it?
Technical glitch in the system.
So our apologies to Rusty, SAS hero, of course.